If you're a real estate investor that is consistently getting told no while you're talking to sellers on a phone call, just remember, according to Derek Dombeck, who's the guest on the show today, no just means not yet, as long as you're handling the phone call correctly. So what we're going to be talking about today with my good friend Derek Dombeck is exactly how to handle those types of phone calls. When you're getting rebuttals, when you're getting all kinds of excuses and people are probing with you, questions and asking you like, hey, what's the exact number you want to give me? And you don't really have the answer for that yet. There's a lot of defensiveness when it comes to talking to sellers, which if you're talking to sellers and you already know the answer to you know what I'm saying is true. So getting past that is very important. So some of the things that we really discuss with Derek on today's show, which he has actual full training on this, which all that will be linked down in the description below. But he talks about how to actually build relationships with sellers and get to what you want by not just listening, but hearing and being aware of their situation, being aware of their personalities. Because we use the example of you might get on a phone call with somebody who literally just wants analytical information. They just want to know how much you're willing to pay for the property, like how'd you get to that number, that sort of thing. They want to know the analytics of, the deal itself. But then you might have people that are a little bit more on the cautious side of credibility. So they may be asking you like, who are you? Where's your office at? Have you ever done any deals that are in our market? Like they're going to be probing for that kind of stuff. And those two personalities, and Derek mentions a couple others too, are going to be handled much differently when you're talking to them. So the importance of being aware of that is very, very paramount. So we'll talk about that today. Now, Derek's been in the real estate investing space since 2003. So he's been on this for 20 plus years, has been doing all kinds of deals, flips, rental properties, wholesaling, everything, you name it. And I believe he's even been a part of a lending company as well. And so he teaches, like I said, he has a program called No Means Not Yet. Once again, we'll have that linked down in the description below. And he talks through basically deals with people live that are students of his, which is a very interesting concept and definitely a good hands-on approach if you are someone that does struggle with closing deals over a phone call, which most of us should be talking to sellers over the phone anyway, if we're not communicating with them through text or communicating with them through face-to-face interaction. So you guys make sure you go check that out. Also, Derek does have a great podcast called Generations of Wealth podcast. I actually was featured on that podcast as a guest, so make sure you do go check that out so you could hear yours truly and a little bit of background behind myself and a little bit about what I brought on the podcast. So once again, that'll be linked down in the description below. You can check that out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all of that. But without further ado, I would like to introduce to you my good friend Derek Dombeck. You're going to get a lot of really good information. He gives a lot of stories and case studies and examples, illustrations. So just make sure you kind of soak it in and apply it as you can. Welcome back to the REI Marketing Weekly. It's your host, Josh Culler. And today I've got a longtime friend. It's been like a very long time since we've known each other and longer than I have actually been in business. You and I have known each other for probably 7-8 years. We go way back. I got my good friend Derek Dombeck on the show. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Josh. And I don't want to show our age, but we've been around for a while.
Yeah, your age. Okay, let's.
Yeah, that's true.
You've been in the industry since 2003. It was 2012 for me. So you've got a decade on me.
I'm pre-internet, man.
That's right, exactly. Actually, that's going to be a very interesting conversation to have today. And obviously, you guys heard the intro. I introduced Derek to the show here, but he's been in the real estate investing space for over 20 years. 2003 is when you got in, and you've done a little bit of everything. And first of all, I do want to plug your podcast, which we'll talk about towards the end as well. How people can find that. But I was a guest on your show. You interviewed me. Absolutely fantastic interview. You guys make sure you go check that out and check out his podcast, of course. But some of the conversations we're going to have today are very, very needed and interesting to learn from Derek specifically. We talk about how marketing and sales cross over frequently, and there's been actually a little bit more frequent than usual people talking about sales and conversations and how to build relationships and that sort of thing. And it's funny, Derek, like a lot of it does come to a center point at some parts where it's like just treat the sellers like you want to be treated and be good people to them. Don't treat them just like a number or transaction, that sort of thing. But everybody gets to that point in some different ways, which is very interesting. And I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So One of the things that you had mentioned when we were bringing up the conversations that we were going to have is just being sort of an expert in getting people from a negotiation standpoint to creating relationships. And there was a statement that you said, I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. I wish I would have wrote it down. It's part of your program that you said. And I'm like, that's exactly what we're going to start talking. So when it comes to negotiations with sellers and when we're trying to market, the active listener right now is a real estate investor trying to get deals under the belt. They're marketing, for leads and that sort of thing. Once we have leads in the pipeline, how are we handling it? What's the first steps that we should be going into with the conversation when we get somebody on a phone call?
Well, first of all, no means not yet is the riveting thing that I said that you couldn't remember, so it clearly wasn't all that riveting.
I was writing it down, and then you showed me the whiskey bottle that you had, and I forgot everything.
That's true. But no means not yet is actually the name of my negotiations training course, and where that came from was everybody that I've known for all these years, and they spend thousands of dollars on marketing, and they always say, well, it's a numbers game, and we're just gonna put out $10,000 a month in marketing costs, and that's going to bring in 1% of leads, through direct mail, and then we're blah, 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 right? We've all heard the same stuff. And why does it have to be a numbers game? If you actually take time to learn how to talk to people and how to negotiate, and by the way, negotiation, all that is a conversation. And anything that you do every day of your life, right? Any social interaction is a negotiation. And if you get to the point, or when you get to a point where you have clear intentions in your mind of what you want to achieve in every social interaction, that can be with your spouse, your kids, a seller, a buyer, a contractor, an attorney, a banker, it doesn't matter. Raising private money, you should always know what your end result, what your end goal is. And then lead that conversation, not manipulate, but lead that conversation so that it's the other party's idea to agree with what you want. Okay, so how do we start? Well, I'm going to talk primarily about dealing with sellers of real estate. But just know this works across the board. Every industry, every negotiation. But this is probably a lot of your listeners. So first thing I want to do as quickly as possible, and by the way, I do the majority of my negotiations over the phone.
Yeah.
Because I work a pretty large area, so I don't get together with owners of properties until we're about 80% sure we're going to have a deal.
Yeah.
So mostly what I do is over the phone, but it works the same across the kitchen table. But you want to start identifying what the personality type is of the person that you're talking to as quickly as possible. And there's many different personality types, but I key in on 3. First one is a driver. They're going to be a quick decision maker. They still may want the details and the data later, but you're going to recognize them. They're basically me, right? They're going to be, just give me the bottom line. What will you give me, or what do you need, right? They're quick to make decisions. If you identify them as a driver and you start giving them a whole bunch of data, you're going to bore the hell out of them and you're going to lose them. Okay. Now, what if they are analytical? Same thing. You have to start giving them more data, more facts, more figures, right? Comps, all the different things that are going to make them comfortable before they're willing to move forward in a transaction. And the third one is more of a social or social conscious person. They're going to be, the clues on that one are they're going to be more consistent with worried about what are you going to do after the closing. Like if you were buying little old grandma's house and turning it into an Airbnb in a residential neighborhood where everybody grew up together, she may not sell you the house just because of that. So as soon as you can identify, and there can be combinations of both, right? I can be half analytical, half social, but now you start talking and leading that conversation in a way that they're not just listening to what you're saying, they're hearing what you're saying, right? Old people like me, we remember a movie called White Men Can't Jump. And there was a scene where they're in the car and Woody Harrelson's character is saying, well, I listen to Jimi Hendrix. I love Jimi Hendrix. And they're like, yeah, you listen, but you don't hear him. No, I listen to him. That is the point. Now, I'm pretty fast talking. I'm a driver. I'm a quick decision maker. Who do you think is the hardest one for me to relate to?
It's going to be that. Well, I think it's going to be the analytical person probably, right?
Yeah. It's going to be the analytical person. By the way, if you just noticed, I didn't say another word until Josh answered my question.
Yeah.
It's very important. If you ask a question, stay silent until you get an answer. Don't cut people off or cut in front of them.
About that though, Derek, that I thought about it for a second and I'm like, is it this one or is it that one? And then I'm like, no, it's definitely analytical, but you did allow me to you didn't lead me into it, which is a good example.
But I did lead you into it. You just didn't realize it. And that is also the point. Like, you want to be in control at all times. And that goes into what I'll talk about briefly in a little bit, which is frame control. But before I jump to that, I do want to finish this thought, right? The sooner you can start talking to people so that they hear you, the more they'll hear, the more they'll relate, and the more likely you can now start getting answers to questions that they would typically not give people. Okay? Again, specific to buying houses, I think that you should have a little elevator pitch, and it should be very well rehearsed and not sound fake. And here's mine. Josh, we buy houses in several different ways. All cash is not a problem, but that's typically going to be my lowest offer. If that doesn't work for you, sometimes we've bought property where we've taken over people's debt payments. If you don't have debt, we can make payments to you over time. Or in some cases, we actually lease property and buy it later using what's called an option. That works usually with like landlords that are trying to offset capital gains taxes. I say all that to you, Josh, just so you know, I'm going to ask you some questions that most people probably wouldn't. Is that all right with you? And pitch. Yeah. Okay. What I've just done is I've, number one, told you I've got multiple ways I can help you.
Right.
Number two, I asked your permission to ask you anything I want. And if you then get a little bit, jumpy or nervous later on, I just circle back. I'm like, Josh, I know I just asked you, how much debt you have on the property, but I'm only asking that. Remember I said early in our conversation that sometimes we take over people's payments? I'm not trying to be nosy. I'm just trying to see if I can help solve your problem. And Josh is like, okay, right? It de-escalates very quickly. So I think everybody should have those two things done within the first 2 to 5 minutes of every conversation. You have to figure out what their personality type is and let them know what you can do for them. Again, if it's a different industry, that's fine. If you're a contractor, fine. Have your elevator pitch something to do with contracting, how you can help them in multiple ways.
Yeah.
But the point is you're trying to get their permission to ask them absolutely anything.
Yeah. So some of the things, Derek, that I want to point out here is, number one, is my biggest takeaway from this is the combination of awareness. So self-awareness of you knowing like how to actually solve this problem, but the way that you be able to present a solution to their problem is by being aware of them. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's hearing, it's listening, but hearing. So it's not one in one ear and out the other, and you're so focused and dialed in on your sales script that you don't deviate from that to try to adjust for those types of personalities that you mentioned, right? Because the way that I'm not an analytical person. So if you speak to me in analytics, you're going to go right over my head and I'm going to start listening and not hearing. Like, I'm
right. You tune out
anything. Yeah. So it's a two-way street, which is an obvious thing to say. Like when you're having a conversation with somebody, it's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street, or else that it's just a one-sided conversation and there is no win-win scenario. So in order to reach that solution, the only way that you can come back to that conversation and say, hey, I'm just trying to provide a solution for you, is by being aware of the way that the conversation is going and how they're handling it. And then if you need to backpedal a little bit, then do that. But it all starts with the awareness of how they're reacting, the way their personality is, and that sort of thing. How do you, I'm curious too, before you go into your next part, if you could just quickly answer this, Is there a way that you can easily identify between those personalities so you can pick up on that super quick? Is that just something that like you feel in your gut, or is there like a process?
Well, you get very familiar with it very fast when you're paying attention, right? So let's just say that they're asking questions about, what are you going to give me for my house? Like that's the first thing they say. They reached out to us because we sent them a letter. They pick up the phone. I say, "Hi, this is Derek," and they cut me off. We're like, "Yeah, you're going to make me an offer on my house." Do you think they're analytical? No, not even a little bit. They're an asshole driver.
Yeah.
Right. And now you got to de-escalate that before you get anywhere, which is actually not hard to do, but you got to be aware of it. Right. Okay. The social one, they're going to be the ones that are maybe asking you questions about what have you done before? Do you have houses that you rent out, or do you fix them up and resell them, or what? They're
probing for like credibility and authority.
Yes, yes, very concerned about what you're going to do to their neighborhood. I mean, analytical; those are pretty easy. They're looking for straight up data. Do you have comps? Do you have contracts? Do you anything like that? Think engineer types, doctors. But the more you do this, and by the way, I highly recommend you guys record your conversations, negotiations, go back and review them, right? I spent years doing this. So it's not like this is just you flip a switch. And by the way, Josh, this is one of my big pet peeves, and I'll get on my soapbox for a second, right? People will spend tens of thousands of dollars to go buy a course to learn how to fill in the blank. I want to be a wholesaler. I want to flip houses. I want to whatever. And they don't spend any time or any money learning how to actually talk to people, which is a lost art in this society nowadays, to actually have a conversation that does not involve electronics. And this stuff still works even if you're doing it electronically. I mean, emails have to be written correctly. Text messages have to be written correctly. But it pisses me off so much because they'll spend that $10,000 a month in marketing and do the numbers game thing because some guru told them that's how you do it. They might be able to spend $1,000 a month in marketing and get the same number of deals if they would just actually learn how to have a conversation.
Yep, I agree.
All right, now I'm getting off my soapbox, but it gets me fired up. I'm not
going to
lie.
put the record straight.
It's bullshit. It just is.
Yeah.
All right. Where were we going next, Josh?
I think, so one of the, as you were kind of going through discussing those, one of the thoughts that I had is, as you're talking about the analytical person, the social person, social conscious person, and then any other personalities you're working with, those are all things that you should be prepared with anyway. So you should be able to adjust pretty quick. You should have the numbers. You should have credibility that you're operating within. Like, those are the kind of things that you will have already before you call that person. Obviously, you may not have the exact dollar amount that you're going to offer somebody for a house because you know nothing about it potentially at that time, but at least you know the formula to be able to get to that to help with that analytical personality. So this is where it comes into play of like knowing your product itself, right? Interrupting this podcast episode to tell you guys that this podcast is managed and produced by Color Media Productions. Yes, shameless plug, that's my company. However, we do this for a lot of other people as well. Most people that we work with are in the real estate investing space. So if you're listening to this podcast specifically, you probably are a real estate investor, given it's called the REI Marketing Weekly. If you're somebody that either wants to start a podcast or you have one going and it's becoming a little bit of a hassle, you're looking to transition to somebody that works a little bit better with a fluid motion in terms of you get the recordings done and then they do everything else. Well, that's what we do. We do fully managed podcasts from start to finish, video, audio, show noting, the graphics, publishing, everything that goes into it. It's a full service business that we run here in a service for you as a real estate investor if you are running a podcast. Additionally, we also do social media and YouTube management as well. So all of that being on the organic side, if you are interested in learning more about working with us and just recording content with guidance and strategy set by myself personally, and then not doing anything else after that, where we're taking care of everything from start to finish, then make sure you go check us out at colormedia.com, CULLER media.com. Hit us up there and we can learn more about working together, hop on a phone call and see what we could do for you. Now back to the episode.
Correct. But here's the next segue into the next part, right? There's overcoming objections, before they voice the objection. We all know what the common objections are in our industry. You know what they are in your marketing industry. I know what they are in my real estate industry. So I want to be the one that overcomes their objections before they voice them. The best way to do that is with storytelling. Okay.
Yeah.
So you just had an example of, well, you don't know exactly what you're going to offer for this property. Great. Josh, you're selling me a house. I've done 30 seconds of research on your house, which means I looked at Zillow. Okay. And we all know it's not accurate, but hey, it gives me a ballpark. I can see on the map where the property is, and I can see it within $100,000 plus or minus what it might be worth. That's literally all the information I have. Okay. So Josh, based off of this conversation that we've had about your 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house, it needs probably $30,000 to $50,000 renovation, because you told me it needs some paint and some flooring and maybe some kitchen cabinets. I don't know exactly what your house would be worth right now. I'd love to give you that offer, but I can tell you we bought and sold one about 6 months ago, a half-mile down on ABC Street. And that one sounds pretty similar. And that one we paid $150,000 for.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's in the range of what you're thinking or not, period. And then I shut up, right? So I'm not saying, Josh, I'm only going to give you $150,000 for your house. I'm saying, hey, I did this other one down the street, and that's what we paid for that one. You are going to come back and give me feedback on that. Because I didn't upset you. I didn't piss you off by saying your house is a piece of junk and I'm only going to give you $150, right? Storytelling is helping overcome those objections. Now, if you come back and say, well, gosh, there's no way I would sell my house for $150,000. I want $200,000 all day long, or you can fly a kite. I understand, Josh. I mean, so far we haven't seen it. We haven't gotten together. I'm just talking about what we've, the information you've given me so far. But let me ask you this, Josh. If my cash offer doesn't work for you, what kind of debt do you have on the property right now? By the way, that's different than saying, how much do you owe for your property? Or how much is your mortgage, right? Your tone and the words you say, very important. It's softer if I say, well, do you have any debt left, Josh? Or how much debt do you have on your property? With that tone, that softer tone. And you're going to answer the question. And then I'm going to say, okay, well, maybe my cash offer doesn't work for you, Josh. And if it doesn't work for you, I wouldn't expect you to do it. But perhaps we could take over your payments and pay you for your equity. And again, I didn't do a whole lot of research on the house. You're filling in all these questions because we asked you for permission early in the conversation to ask these questions.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things that, as you're bringing up the conversation, call them storytelling, case studies, testimonials, whatever you want to call them. By inserting that type of conversation, if you're telling a story, and especially if it's something like exactly what you talked about, like we bought this house down the street or around the corner or within the same neighborhood or whatever, that accomplishes one of the number one things in marketing or sales that people overlook. To me, is one of the most important. It's the reason why we market in the first place or have any kind of conversations like this with customers. It's the word relevance. You're bridging a gap between relevance, which closes knowledge gaps, right? So at the moment, they may not know that you are credible and you have any sort of authority within the marketplace. As soon as you give them that case study and say, like, I bought this house that's very similar to yours down the street, similar bed bath, and oftentimes if it's in a small neighborhood, they may be like, oh, you're the one who bought that property? Like that, those kind of stories come up all the time because people know what's around them, right? You're creating relevance, a bridge of relevance, and relevance bridges the knowledge gap. If you think of it as like two pieces of land of like unsurety and like credibility, the bridge that you're building and creating is the river that's flowing between those two pieces of land, and the bridge that you're building over that river. That river is a knowledge gap. A bridge is relevance. And if you bring those two things together, it's such an easier conversation to have going into starting to talk about the deal itself and now negotiating and now giving them the honest truth in the answer.
Right. But wait, there's more. So, okay, let's just say that 95% of our leads don't actually lead to a contract.
Mm-hmm.
And most people have just one tool, which is a big damn hammer. It's a cash offer, 65 or 70% of ARV minus repairs, take it or leave it. Okay. Well, now we've got Josh talking about, yeah, I owe $200,000 on this house, and I can't take your cash offer. Okay. People say, well, how do you market for creative deals? You don't market for creative deals any different than you do for a standard cash deal. You find and construct creative deal structures through conversations, period. So now I'm going to start looking to solve Josh's problem. But Josh's problem might even be the opposite. He may not have any debt on the property. And he doesn't really want to take payments over time. He does just want to sell it outright. And it's a retail house. I had this happen this morning on a lead. Retail house, actually 2 days ago. Retail house doesn't need anything. Turns out the seller was a probate attorney, so that's turning into a much better conversation in the future because she has leads. But we're talking about it, and I said, hey, we've gotten to know each other now for the last 20, 25 minutes, and it's clear that I am not your best option to buy your house. Somebody's going to give you full retail. It's a beautiful home. You told me you don't have much debt on the property. I've already told you when we buy for cash, we use investor money. And we pay our investors a pretty healthy return on their money secured by real estate, just like your house. Would that be something of interest to keep talking about with you? Okay, so most people throw the leads away as soon as they say no to your cash offer. I have raised money from perfect strangers that I've talked to on the phone for 15 to 30 minutes because they had a free and clear house and they were going to stick it into a money market account or a bank CD or some other horrendous thing that gives them next to nothing returns. And, the one guy, this is going back 2 years, so maybe 3 years. He had $316,000 that he wanted for his house, 316, 320, something like that. Free and clear. Didn't need a thing. And this was April. And same thing. We had the conversation. We started talking about investing. I said, I would give you 9%, 10% return on your money on that secured by real estate. When do you think it's going to sell? And he said, well, probably by August. I said, is it okay with you if I put a calendar reminder in my CRM and I follow up with you August 1st and we continue this conversation? He said, yeah, absolutely. Why not? Called him August 1st. He had it under contract to close August 6th. And he turned into not only a $300,000 investor at that time, he added more money in the future. So we raised over $500,000 from that guy on a dead lead on a retail house that I guarantee you everybody that's listening to this show that does what I do would have walked away from.
Yeah.
But that's because we set that up and we led that conversation from start to finish.
Interesting. And when you have conversations like that, you never truly know where they're going to lead. And by sticking to your guns and, like you said, just swinging that hammer, all cash offer, and then, take it or leave it, that type of attitude, that will close doors for you. That will close opportunities for you. And those could lead to other amazing things for your business down the road, for sure. Well, which in your business, as long as you have, I'm sure you've seen your fair share of that kind of stuff.
Well, that would be another great point. People are saying, well, Derek, you're lucky. Where do you get these deals from? Always leave value. Even if you know you're not going to get a deal. Hey, Josh, I'm not your best option. Do you have a good real estate agent to work with? If not, I've got great relationships with some that are really good. Do you have a lender to work with? Do you have a contractor to work with? Whatever you need. I want to leave value. Why? Because 2 years from now, I'm going to get some random phone call and it's going to say, yeah, Josh said you were a great guy and you really helped him out and I got a house to sell and I'm not going to remember you.
Yeah.
Right? But I left value with you enough to remember me and pass on my information. So always leave value.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I'll cap on that is the way I like to approach it. And this is why me being in the content marketing space, I teach investors to do this all the time. But I teach people to take, video content and content in itself and leave it out there as like a resource for your sellers, right? So it's a good driver to curate and, kind of nurture the leads because you're delivering value to them, answering questions that they may have. They may be looking at a video that talks about the difference between working with a realtor or a cash buyer real estate investor. And then you answer that question for them. You've automatically nurtured that lead and built some credibility by having conversations like that does the exact same thing. It markets to them. And like you said, the example is that person later on down the road will remember that. And it's a great marketing tool, right? So, Derek, this has been fantastic. We are approaching 25 minutes here, and I want to be able to leave some time on the clock for you to be able to kind of talk about some ways to connect with you. I think we have a whole lot of other things to be able to talk about, so we'll have you back again soon, of course.
That'll be great.
But I know that my episode, at the time of this recording, my episode on your podcast, Generations of Wealth podcast, did just go out. I believe it was last week or early this week, if I'm not mistaken. So you guys make sure you go check that out. We'll leave that down in the description below. But other ways to work with you, I know you have your program and everything. So talk about podcasts a little bit, talk about ways to connect with you on the program and what you have to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, pretty much anything and everything I do, you can find at thegenerationsofwealth.com. And so the podcast, that's the host the host website for the podcast. But the podcast can be found on Spotify and all the other podcast, syndicated groups. But Generations of Wealth, it's a movement, and that's really what we want it to be. We want people to give back and this is not just financial wealth. This is spiritual wealth and physical wealth and time wealth and everything else that goes with it. And our mantra is live your vision, love your life. And that's something that we fully believe in. From an education standpoint, actually, I do have what's called the Generations of Wealth Voyage, which is a once a year cruise that happens to be going out. Maybe, I don't know when this is going on air, Josh. So, we may be, already done with that event. But beyond that, I run the REI Circle of Trust, which is several national mastermind groups, and the Elite Negotiations Academy that we do twice a month. So what I was just doing with you guys and Josh, my members, they submit recorded negotiations, and twice a month for an hour, we pick them apart and we talk about what you could have done differently, how you recognize different cues. And then that all leads to a full-blown negotiations training I do have available. It's called No Means Not Yet. And that is a full 2-day recorded live training. First day, plus I think an hour or two of day 2 was just straight-up content, right? Classroom content. Then we went into live calls. I made the first 3 calls, and then it was students making calls with me sitting next to them. It was really powerful. And out of those calls, I know there was at least 2 properties that were closed.
Wow.
And I think that was 8 or 9 calls total. So, but it all comes down to whatever I can do to serve you, Josh, and your community. I'm an open book, not trying to sell you something to help you. If you need anything, just find the Generations of Wealth and you'll find me. Or search me out on socials, Derek Dombeck.
Yep. Awesome. I appreciate all that, guys. Everything that Derek mentioned will be linked down in the show notes below, so make sure you do go check that out. Go check out his podcast, check out the programs that he has, and make sure you invest some time into that. Derek, man, I appreciate your time. This has been absolutely fantastic. A lot of great takeaways. Definitely a different, again, like I started the podcast off, everybody kind of has their little methods of getting to building relationships with sellers, and I think that you've laid this out a little bit more thoroughly from a standpoint of identifying the personalities between people and actually how to handle each and every one of those, which I think was very, very valuable. So,
Josh, the last thing I would love to say is practice. This works with everybody. So who do you practice with to start with? Your family, your friends, right? Just start identifying how they react to what you do and what you say and how you say it. It's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. When you go, next time you go to McDonald's, the next time you sit down at a restaurant, you're checking out at Dick's Sporting Goods or wherever you're going, test it out.
Just go and try and get free upgrades at hotels or whatever, like that type stuff. Things that you can't possibly lose. If they say no, who cares?
Yeah.
But do it. Yeah, I'd love to help you with it.
That's amazing. Awesome. Well, Derek, thank you for your time. I appreciate you and look forward to having you back again soon.
I appreciate it, Josh. Have a great day.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, make sure you do check out the show notes and all the links down below to connect with Derek and everything that's got going on. Listen to his podcast as well. And if you haven't already, make sure you have subscribed to the show and share it around with some friends if you think that they need some help with their marketing and sales as a real estate investor. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you have checked out all of my socials and my YouTube content as well. I'm putting out daily content, showing you guys how to create content organically and be able to get it out consistently, doing the practices correctly and that sort of thing. I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening and joining in, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.